Thanks so much for joining us. It's crunch time for high school seniors and their families applying for college admissions next fall after a tumultuous year in the college industry, which of course is a key sector of our local economy. Here to shed some light on what's going on with higher ed is John Marcus, higher ed editor for the Hechinger Report, a nonprofit news organization covering education issues, and my former editor 100 years ago at Boston Magazine. Good to see you.
John, it's great to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming in. So you recently wrote a piece about how it's easier to get into college now than it has been in many years. Acceptance rates are way up. So in light of that, should parents watching us be thinking of shopping harder or bargaining harder for better deals for their kid?
Yes, they absolutely should. It's a buyer's market, and there's a mythology, especially around here, where we measure our status by the college sticker on the back window of the Volvo, that where our kid goes to college is so hugely important. People have been kind of obsessed with the very low selection rates of elite private universities. In general, however, 87% of universities and colleges accept more than half of the applicants they get. On average, 78% of applicants to college are accepted. This number has been going up because we're running out of 18-year-olds. Starting in 2026, you mentioned high school seniors. This is the last big class of high school seniors. After this year, the numbers begin to go down. If you have fewer customers, you take more of them, and to your point, you charge them less. So colleges and universities are giving more discounts in financial aid. And I think something that consumers often don't realize is they can negotiate for more. They don't have to take the first offer of financial aid. They can go back and say, can you do a little better?
What about a non-financial aid situation? Can you bargain the tuition?
Well, you can. Financial aid often comes in the form of a discount. A university or college will give it a fancy name of the, Bright Star Scholarship. But in fact, it's just another way of giving you a discount, as anyone would do who's selling a commodity. And those discounts now are 56% on average of the revenue from tuition.
Wow.
Goes back out the door in the form of a discount. That is an extraordinary discount. And so it's really good news for consumers, not great news for colleges. And because we live in an area where not only is there a lot of competition to get into college, but there are a lot of colleges and our economy is largely dependent on higher education, we need to be worried about colleges being able to remain financially sustainable.
Well, and in recent years, we've seen some local schools close or scale down. What do we do about that?
I'm not sure what we can do about that. It's a perfect storm. They are running out of students. Because we're running out of 18-year-olds. People stop having children during a recession. And during the 2008 recession, people stopped having kids. That, if you take that forward 18 years, that hits in 2026, the number of 18-year-olds begins to go down. It will go down by 15% between 2026 and 2039. It's already gone down by 10% since 2011. On top of that, you are likely to see a decline in the number of international students under a Trump administration. Empirically, that happened in the first Trump administration. The number of international students coming here went down by 12%, hugely dependent on international students here in the Boston area. We're likely to see that number fall. You've got political attacks on colleges and universities that they have not been very good at responding to, and a lot of other issues that are coming up in the way of colleges' financial sustainability.
So, John, average annual in-state college tuition in Massachusetts as of 2022 was just under 30 grand, about 15K higher than the national average. 61 grand to go to BU, nearly 64 grand to go to Tufts. With all due respect to Tufts, that's mind-blowing. Is it worth it?
Wow. Well, that's a question that a lot of people have been asking. The value proposition is one of the reasons that fewer high school graduates are going directly to college. The proportion of high school graduates nationally going directly to college has declined from a peak of 70% in 2016. It's now down to 62%. That's a lot. That's a dramatic decline. So the public isn't convinced that it's worth it. And I blame colleges for that. I think that they've done a very bad job at selling themselves. They're not very good at explaining the value, for example, of a liberal arts education that might be worth that much money at a Tufts or BU. Is it worth it? It depends on the major. There are a lot of majors that aren't worth it. Since the Obama administration, there have been efforts by Democratic administrations that have typically been taken off the table by Republican administrations to strip the option of getting federal financial aid for programs that don't pay enough to cover the debt, the student loan debt that people borrow to pay for the program. That is a potential solution to this. Then we would weed out a lot of programs that cost more than they're worth in the marketplace.
Well, here in Massachusetts, the State Board of Higher Ed is talking about allowing schools to cut the number of credits needed for a bachelor's degree in certain majors so that you could get your degree in 3 years instead of 4. Merrimack College is already experimenting with this, a kind of a test program. I guess that's good news for the customers, maybe not so good for the business model of these places.
It's a really interesting question. If you do the math, the 3-year degree is something that has come up periodically. It has some momentum now because of the cost of college. I've visited some programs in states like Minnesota that are doing 3-year degrees. You have to go to college in the summer, although it's sort of strange that we don't already go to college in the summer. Our academic calendar is based around sort of this agrarian calendar and dates from a period before air conditioning. So we take off, we finish school in April, and we start again in September. That's a big chunk of the year, on top of which, incidentally, we're about to go take a 2-month break for the holidays as well. We're not in school very often, and I think we can use that time more effectively. If it works, I imagine it would also increase what's called retention, which is the number of people that actually stick to school. Right now, a quarter of freshmen do not come back to college as sophomores. You're losing a quarter of your customers between freshman and sophomore year. That's a big financial loss. If you could keep them through a 3-year degree, maybe that would actually make up for the lost extra year.
Listen, I just want to use our final moment here to ask a question that I've been wondering about, and I don't have really enough time, in fairness, for a good, in-depth answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What on earth is wrong with Harvard University? He had a year that began with the president being kicked to the curb, a sacrificial lamb for all sorts of failures of the institution. It turned out that when they were deliberating how to respond to the vile student statement blaming Israel for the Hamas attack of October 7th, they were upset about using the word violent to describe the Hamas attack. And most recently, they let their international students know that they wouldn't be allowed to stay on campus over the winter break. A kind of a ridiculous. What's wrong with this place?
Okay, you're right. That would be a very, very long answer, and I think it speaks to a lot of why we are in a kind of a turning point in higher education generally. There is somewhat of a tone deafness among university and college leaders and administrators. Most of them come up through the academic ranks. Very few of them have actual experience in business. These are multi-billion-dollar institutions in cases such as Harvard. They follow literally none of the rules that other kinds of organizations do. Harvard has a very good success rate, but if you look nationally at the outcomes of higher education, you have fewer than half of students in 4-year programs actually manage to graduate in 4 years. We lose a quarter of them in the first year. They give away 56% of their revenue. None of these things you wouldn't survive that in the private sector.
Yeah.
And so universities and colleges have sort of always had an ample supply of students. They haven't had to be worried about this kind of thing. Now that they have to be worried about it, they're not really sure. I compare it to our industry, journalism. Journalism wasn't ready for the disruption that happened when the internet appeared. Higher education hasn't been ready for the attacks, for the culture wars, for the other attacks on them. They've been a really easy target. And one last point about Harvard, you may know that the president who was forced to resign still works there. Imagine if a CEO in a private sector company was forced to step down but got to keep their job. That's what happens in higher education. Same at several of the other universities
Right.
whose presidents had to step down.
Well, times are changing. They're going to have to change with them. The Hechinger Report's a great place to keep track of all the changes. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, John.